Hi, everyone. Welcome to yet another weekly meeting for the Merge Request Report Widgets Working Group. And we'll get started with the first initial checks. So looking at the checklists for the launch, have the blockers been solved? I would say yes, unless somebody knows anything else that I don't know about. Okay. Give it 2 seconds. I think that's enough. Feature flag enabled in production. That's a yes. And feature flag default, yes, has been enabled. So that's great. So that just signals that customers will start getting this with 15.2, and then we'll hear back from them if anything comes along like not positive to fix, but we have good hopes. And regarding the working group wrap up, so we can consider the widgets released, I would say, and the documentation has been reviewed and completed. I would say yes too. We reviewed it last week. A technical writer and an IC that is contributing to the widget did review the documentation, felt like it was appropriate to the current state. So I'll consider that a yes. So for now, I would say I will keep the calls going for until after the release of 15.2, just so in case something comes up from testing and all that stuff from customers. But we should be looking to wrap up the working group soon. So to prepare for that. And that doesn't mean that there won't be technical efforts beyond the working group, but those will happen outside of the context with the normal process of reviews and involving the right people. We have the DRIs. The DRIs will live on after the working group. So just an FYI. Questions on that checklists? All good? Cool. So yes, the announcement that we have here is that the feature flag has been enabled by default, which is great. Thanks, Phil, and thanks, Yannick, for announcing. We don't have any discussion items. Does anybody have any before we go on to the technical one? Okay. Then we move over to the technical discussion here. And Jeremy, this is technical, so if you want to sit in and listen, feel free. If you want to drop out, feel free. But Savash, you have the floor.
Sorry,
Mark.
I would add, it is technical, but I think the question it brings up comes into the trade-off between flexibility and consistency, and I think UX needs to have a voice in that.
Then stay put, Jeremy. Thanks for the call out, Mark. Yeah, that's very true. So please, Savas, take it away.
Yeah. I was gonna say the same, because the solution also involves the UX team. So yeah, I think most of us is like I created an issue regarding the technical limitations on the extension API, and I documented it. I left a link if you haven't checked it. I'm not gonna go through the details right now, but basically the summary is that the extension API in some cases is very restrictive for the developer, and we have to come up with workarounds which include some not very happy solutions. And so basically it's very JavaScript. It's like using vanilla JavaScript, whereas I think a few years ago GitLab moved to Vue.js, so the solution is leveraging Vue.js for this. I think everyone left the comments there, so we were on. From my understanding, I spoke with Yannick, with Fernando. I notified Phil, and everyone was, as far as I know, is on board to go with the solution that uses Vue components. So we keep the logic right now, what we built. The logic remains the same, but instead of centralizing the whole presentational logic in a base Vue component, we're gonna come up with a component that accepts slots, so like GitLab UI, and then we're gonna use that for the skeleton. So the skeleton is gonna be the same. The logic is gonna stay the same. So visually, it shouldn't change anything. It's just that how we develop it's gonna change. so for the, are there any questions so far? No. Okay, cool. So for the implementation plan, what I thought is the security widget is pretty complex. So for instance, when you click on the model, so that we display a list of vulnerabilities, and when you click on the vulnerability, we display a model. And that model, if you check the code, that file is 800 lines. So I have to do the same work to make it work for the extension API. So that's where actually I was blocked. And the implementation plan that I had in mind is basically using the security widget as a pilot, and then build this presentational component, use it for the security widget, and then if everything goes well, we roll out one by one the other widgets. It shouldn't be a big work because it's not a complete refactor. It's just the way how we represent, how we develop the presentational logic. So it's the business logic is going to stay the same. And the UX is concerned because right now the code is supposed to be strict, but with solutions like HTML injection, it's actually not very strict. And we do actually HTML injection in some cases. So, but we sacrifice efficiency for being strict, for consistency. I think the consistency should be solved in the code review with code review guidelines. So whenever we do a code review, we have the UX label. So the UX should be included in the code review and then follow the code guidelines. And that's where we should be consistent, not in the code. So that's basically the idea of the technical discussion. I think if you have any questions, just let me know, I can clarify.
No, thank you. My worry was that exactly, yeah, in the beginning, we started discussing the code, allowing what the framework allows you to do. But like you said very well, like by using the methods we have right now, you could inject something that is not part of the framework today. So I don't think there's a change in regards to that, so much so that we'll keep continuing checking for consistency on the code review. It's just that it makes your life easier because it then goes to a view component approach rather than a method from JavaScript. So all of that seems like a very obvious and logical evolution of the code. So from my side, and I chatted with Phil this week, and we have no objections about moving this forward. So yeah, thanks for the proposal. I think it will make things a lot easier to work with.
Okay, that's pretty nice. Yep. Jeremy?
Yeah, I was going to ask, in regards to GitLab UI, would you actually build this in GitLab UI?
Well, the same question came from Andre, and the answer to that was, I didn't think it like that, but like if, so initially we would build it in GitLab, but then if it's something that can be reused across different places, so why not moving it to GitLab UI? Because it's going to be a presentational component. It's going to accept some methods, like what we do today with the extension API, and then it's going to present the component.
Okay. Yeah, my original hope was to actually have it in GitLab UI. And because when I designed this, I abstracted out a lot of pieces that I felt could actually be used elsewhere. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to share screen really quick here. And this is purely conceptual design here, so nothing that's actually moving towards production or anything, but working on some redesign efforts for different areas of the product. So if you look at, for example, on-call schedules, and it has this kind of a layout already where we have this chevron, we have controls, we have content, being able to leverage that the MR widget structure for something like this, where we have controls in a similar way, and abstract out that presentation layer would be, a huge win to have in GitLab UI. Another example might be epic tree where we have this today. And if we went to something like this elsewhere, we could have controls, the option to toggle or not, et cetera. So I would love to have it there and kind of vote for that abstraction if possible. And in that way too, we could update the actual pajamas documentation. Right now we're using just like Figma embeds for it to represent items, and it would be awesome to actually have live coded examples. And in that way, we would have more checks and balances for QA to say, oh, what's acceptable in a slot and how do things work in there for the widget, and be able to more quickly build that out and adapt it and have actual code that we can check against. So I'm all for that.
So that's a pretty good suggestion. Now that I see the other designs, I think that having one component and then using it for similar use cases, it definitely makes sense. But what I'm gonna suggest is let's iterate on this. First, maybe we start with GitLab, and then we adapt it for the MR widget, and then we extend it to GitLab UI. Because right now, if we try to cover all use cases, it may complicate our life. So what I'm going to suggest is just put it on GitLab right now and then move it to GitLab UI. But if we can collaborate on this so that I know the use cases while I develop the component, so that for future it's going to be easier to migrate it to GitLab UI, I think it's even better.
Yeah, I'm totally aligned. That's awesome.
Fantastic. Just a quick proposal. You kind of already said it, Savash, but just proposing that it might be super beneficial to now pair up with UX, and in a dry run, let's speak about potential component, because it won't be one MR widget GitLab UI component. It is going to be probably a zoo of them. So teaming up with UX now and speaking up with what would potential GitLab UI components, what would be of use, would probably be pretty helpful. We still can then iterate on them and first put it into GitLab and then to GitLab UI later. But to get a broad idea, that might be beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
But so that, just so I understand this right, it wouldn't be, so what Jeremy was showing, it feels like there's an abstraction thing we can do and have the basics, like name it something generic, not something specific to Merge Request Widget, just like I don't know, not an expansion accordion, but like a name for the concept that will go into the GitLab UI, but then it would still allow you to, because I think he wants to use the UI, not particularly the mechanics of the Merge Request Widget. Is that right?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have Mark. You have a question?
You're muted.
You stole my point, Andre. That's exactly what I was going to say. Not that you could have known, sorry. Yeah, exactly. So the MR widget, as in the issue, is quite specifically about merge requests, whereas the designs are more collapsible container. I don't know what you would want to call that kind of thing, or sort of grouped container. I don't know, something generic. Exactly. So I had a further point on that. So I think the collapsible container can definitely go into GitLab UI. That makes a lot of sense. The MR widget that is based on top of that probably belongs still in GitLab because it's very GitLab specific. Merge request specific even. So.
My question there, Savash, can these two things be accomplished in the same effort? Like extracting that collapsible container into GitLab UI and also build this thing, or are those two separate efforts?
I think we need a spike. So first need to collaborate with the UX and then see what exactly is being done. Because if we just extract one, it's one component like the container, it's like the GL card component. And then we put whatever we want inside it. So it depends on what are the use cases, see what we can reuse and whatnot. So if I have an overview, or if we have an overview of what's being expected, I think we can, I would work on at the same time as well. It's for me, it's not a big issue.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, definitely we should create issues for that then, so we can track those two. So one, we already have the proposal, the V2, but we can probably create an issue for that spike. Can you take care of that, Savash? Create the issue and then follow on with that. Thanks. We have raised hands. Jeremy, Mark, I don't know who was first.
Jeremy, go ahead.
Thanks.
Yeah, so Savas, the mention of the card, that's exactly what I was going to say. So it's very similar to that. And just a little background, I'm working on an effort for Pajamas right now to kind of restructure the IA and the way we organize things in there. And so I would see that this kind of a collapsible, whatever we call it, this widget type thing would be abstracted as a component, but then I'm working on more of a patterns kind of concept that's where to your point, Mark, the MR widgets would fit. Like, here's a component, but here's how we're using it in a pattern and in a repeatable way. And so trying to add more structure around Pajamas in a way that makes GitLab specific things have a place to live in a meaningful way that can be built upon those components, so that we can keep, a single source of truth. So that's just some background there. So I'm aligned with all that.
Mark. Muted again.
I was getting better at that for a while. Now I'm bad at it again. I need to practice. So zooming out a little bit again, the reason for this initiative was to bring consistency, because, every widget grew organically and the widgets were doing whatever they wanted into, like hitting endpoints and refreshing and, building massive DOM structures and so on. And it was getting very heavy. And so the whole point of this was to try and tame that and keep it and manage it more explicitly from a top level, so things don't get out of hand. Which is to say that if we had known where we would end up years ago, maybe the security widget wouldn't have been so complicated, if you see what I mean. Like, the whole reason for this initiative is to keep complexity low enough that there isn't too much going on in these widgets. There's, this extension was built to put some brakes on the engineering side of, let's make this a bit harder for engineers so that they don't get carried away with trying to implement designs that they've been given. And it's like another barrier to sort of complexity there. So if we lift those barriers, how do we prevent complexity climbing up again? So for instance, if we do this rewrite so that we have this sort of base view component, there's nothing technically preventing someone from saying on mounted, hit these endpoints, which is not what we want to do anymore, because the extension manages requests and so on. So how would we prevent that kind of growth again?
I think so. Right now, actually, we can still on mount. We don't do that on mount, but maybe we can do it on fetch. Before fetching the full data or the collapse data, we can hit any endpoint anyways. So technically, it's still possible. It's just that the engineer needs to use workarounds to make it work. And we already do that. Like even for leaving a simple, for instance, the security widget, it displays a summary, and then below the summary on the same visual component, like on the same div, we display like 5 critical, 10 high, and 20 others vulnerabilities detected. And to do that, I need to inject HTML to leave a breaking line. So we still have the capability to do pretty much whatever we want, but in a harder way. So I think this should be enforced. Again, this should be enforced through code review guidelines, because if you check the security widget, it's not the same with the other widgets. Either we redesign the security widget and then we say, okay, we just display a very tiny data and then we link it to another page. But that's, again, it's not an MR widget anymore. It's a different standalone page. Or we try to enforce the consistency through code review guidelines and give the developer the tools necessary for them to complete the job. Because right now we still give the developer some tools to complete the job, but they have to reinvent their own tools to match the design. To give you another example, we need to add a popover on the security widget. So when the security training is enabled, the user sees a blue dot and then goes on it, and then it displays a popover. So it's not right now, it's not supported. So what we need to do is we need to extend the base view, add some logic that affects all widgets, and just base view. It's gonna right now it's already 400 lines, so it's probably gonna grow even more.
Yeah, I guess with composability comes great responsibility. I think what you're saying definitely rings true, and thanks for Mark for the call out. What I think prevents us from getting to the same place is the UX framework. And I've seen already discussions. I think it was Samantha that brought up on that thread, on that proposal from Savash, they want to add something that no other widget has, and the UX is in there discussing things. So the restraints are at the UX level. Are they discussing how can we add this to the framework, or what is the kind of warning that we display? Is it this one? Is it that one? And again, like Savash was saying, we can already abuse the current things today, but it will take a village to keep this in the line within its lane for sure. But the point for me that drove this home was when Savash showed me the existing part of the code that they just couldn't reuse as it is with the current methods, and if they had view components, they could just like import that. So we don't want to make life harder just for the sake of making life harder. We want to still provide like a structured, what's the name? Like a shape of the widget for you to fill in, but not completely cut your hands off, so to speak. So there is a margin there. Does that satisfy you, Mark? Do you think that that's enough for us to go forward with it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so as I understand it, there's visual consistency that we want, and that is sort of handled at the UX level, and hopefully will continue to be with the framework, which is great. But there's also the technical consistency in terms of like when and how you do requests, or so maybe what we could do is have like where these MR widgets live is have an ESLint rule or something which prevents like unmounted hooks or something like that. I don't know. Just so that you're really forced to use the framework so that you can't go outside of its bounds technically with like requests and stuff. But yeah, that might get tricky.
I that sounds like a good idea if we want to go there. But I think we follow the development of the security widget that Savaz was saying, and we'll keep evolving from there. But definitely something for us to consider putting in place. More about the accident, not about the harmful intent. It's more like, oh, you didn't notice that you're importing something that hasn't mounted, you get a warning. Yeah, good.
Yeah, was gonna say, so if we impose limits on the technical side, we're always gonna come up with workarounds, because if like that, at least that's what happened right now. So technically, it's in a way it's possible to do something. So let's do that. Exactly, engineers are tricky like that, and so I think this should, like, the whole consistency thingy should live on the first of all when the UX is designing the widget, and second of all, probably if we want to really be rigid, maybe GitLab bot somehow assigns maintainers that are DRIs. So because that should be in the code review. That's why we have code reviews, I think.
That begs the question: should we make them code owners for these files, for these paths? Okay, that's something. Maybe I'll open an issue and discuss that separately. Thank you. Any other points on this very useful discussion?
So to sum up the action points, I'm going to create an issue on how for a spike with the UX, and then I'm just going to go ahead and then start developing the
V2.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. So from my understanding, you'll be leading that charge in terms of like executing. We'll be around to help out with counseling, like reviews and all that stuff. So keep us posted on the planning and things. But from now on, I would say that this is an effort that is going to be starting within the working group, but probably ending outside of the working group. So I will make you the DRI of that effort. Argue with, again, your manager and try to find that schedule in terms of your capacity and all that stuff. But we're here to help if you need. But yes, that we're going to be finishing off after the working group ends.
Cool.
Great stuff. Then anybody has any other points? Well, thank you for a fantastic discussion. Thank you so much for the proposal. I can tell you that personally it was exciting to see someone else taking care of this little living, breathing piece of code that we created in code review. And it does take a village. So we really appreciate the help in making this evolve beyond what we started. And that's how we know this will succeed, is because other people are caring about it just like us. So thank you for that. All the best and have a wonderful rest of your day. See you next week.